You are looking at a small, black-and-white snapshot, the kind you could slip into a pocket. It shows a crowded ship's deck in 1912. Men in flat caps, women with shawls pulled tight against the wind, children pressed up to the rail. They're squinting and smiling into the spring light. Faces turned toward the camera, hands half raised in waves. A real feeling of excitement hangs in the air. People about to cross an ocean toward a new life. At first your eye stays on the people. Then someone enlarges the scan just a little, and a detail at the edge comes into focus. Hanging on the bulkhead behind them is a life ring. Around its white curve, in block letters, a name comes clear: R.M.S. Titanic, Liverpool. In the family album where this photograph was found, a caption insists these people arrived safely in New York in April 1912. The ship whose name is printed just behind their shoulders never did. So the question settles in. Who exactly is in this picture? Is it a family souvenir of a safe crossing, or a last glimpse of people the ocean took? And how did a happy deck snapshot end up tied to one of the worst maritime disasters in history? To answer that, we have to follow this single image out into passenger lists, survivor testimonies, immigration files, and church memorials, and see whose story it has been quietly carrying for more than a century. In the spring of 1912, steamships were the arteries between Europe and America. On the quays of Southampton, Cherbourg, Queenstown, crowds pressed forward with trunks and satchels, clutching tickets and hope. On one of those ships, advertised from Belfast to New York as the largest and safest steamer afloat, sailed Titanic. Far away in Davenport, Iowa, in 2021, siblings cleaning out their late grandfather's farmhouse attic opened a cracked leather trunk. Inside, they found the usual debris of a long life: a rosary, folded shirts gone yellow at the creases, envelopes of letters, a small stack of old photographs gathered in a rubber band. One of those photographs showed people on a ship's deck, smiling into the wind. On the back, in the neat block capitals of the 1970s, someone had written, "On our way to New York, April 1912. Under that, in looser cursive, Grandpa Sean on the boat. For the O'Rourkes, the family that owned that trunk, the story had always been simple. At every Thanksgiving, every wedding, someone would say that Grandpa Sean nearly took Titanic, but missed it, and came over on a different ship. It was a near-miss story, still close enough to magic to make the children listen. One of those children grew up to be a history teacher. Her name is Megan O'Rourke. When she scanned the deck photograph and shared it, half-idly, in an online forum for Titanic enthusiasts, she expected polite interest and maybe someone recognizing the ship class. What she got instead was silence, then a flurry of messages. Users cropped and zoomed the shared image. They pushed contrast, sharpened edges. The faces became clearer. So did the life ring hanging behind them, the letters marching around its rim. There was no doubt. R.M.S. Titanic, Liverpool. The case stands out from a sea of Titanic myths and what-ifs because it's not about a ticket never used or a legend told at a bar. It is anchored in something you can see and touch. A real photograph, a real caption in a family album, a real ship's name on painted canvas. And yet, when Megan checked widely available Titanic passenger lists, she found no one named Sean O'Rourke on board. Ellis Island records did show a John S. O'Rourke, misspelled, arriving in New York in April 1912, but not on Titanic. On a different ship, the Carpathia. The same Carpathia that had gone down in history as the vessel that plucked Titanic's survivors from the North Atlantic. In her family Bible, kept in the same trunk, a page of careful entries records births and arrivals. Under Children of Michael and Bridget O'Rourke, someone had written, "Sean, gone to America, April 1912. There was no mention of Titanic at all. Back in Ireland, in a parish on the Kerry coast, the baptismal registers of St. Brendan's Church list two boys born to Michael and Bridget O'Rourke, Patrick in 1890 and Sean in 1894. In the 1911 Irish census, both appear still at home, farm laborers on their father's small holding. Across those records, a pattern emerges. One son stayed, one son left. But when Megan spread the documents out on her table, the photograph, the Bible, the Ellis Island printout, something did not line up. The deck picture showed more than one young Irishman. The life ring named Titanic. The caption in the album said Grandpa Sean. The official lists did not agree. If all the paper says Patrick died at sea and Sean arrived later on Carpathia, then who is that young man near the rail, smiling straight at the lens? And whose reflection exactly does the Iowa family see when they say, "That's Grandpa on the boat"? To understand what might have happened between that ship's rail and that Midwestern trunk, you have to step back into the world those brothers left behind. In 1912, County Kerry was a place of small fields, damp stone walls, and lives measured out in hard seasons. St. Brendan's Church stood at the edge of a village, its bell calling fishermen and farmers alike. In the parish registers, written in a priest's rounded Latin, the O'Rourke boys appear as infants held over a font, one in 1890, another in 1894. By the time Titanic was being fitted out in Belfast, Patrick was in his early 20s and Sean in his late teens. The 1911 census page that lists them shows them still in their parents' household, their occupations simply farm laborer. Around them, the wider world was changing. Letters from America arrived, thin blue envelopes smelling faintly of coal smoke and ink. One of those letters, now as fragile as dried leaves, sits in the O'Rourke trunk in Iowa. It is from a cousin, Nora Flaherty, already in New York by 1910. In it she tells dear Aunt Bridget about her work as a domestic servant on the Upper West Side, about wages that seem princely compared to what the farm can offer. In one line she writes, "We will send for one of the boys first, and then when he is settled, he can help bring the other. There is plenty of work here if a man can stand the city." On the other side of the sea, in Belfast and Southampton, the White Star Line was spending money to convince people like Patrick and Sean that its newest ship was the way to get there. Ads in the Cork Examiner and Irish Independent promised Titanic as the largest and safest steamer afloat, with excellent third-class accommodations for emigrants. Third-class fares from Queenstown to New York were within reach for families who could sell a cow or borrow from kin, like Nora. By April 1912, that plan appears to have become real. Somewhere in Kerry, someone scraped together enough for one ticket. In the Titanic third-class passenger list, compiled after the sinking, Patrick O'Rourke, 22, last residence Kerry, occupation, laborer, appears among those embarking at Queenstown. There's no Sean listed. By the standards of the day, photography was no longer rare. On land, Kodak's Brownie cameras had put snapshots into the hands of ordinary people. At sea, professional ship photographers made a living selling souvenir images, the grand staircase in first class, promenades in second, and sometimes for a fee, group shots of third-class passengers on deck, laughing in borrowed sunlight. The Ulster Folk and Transport Museum in Belfast holds several surviving examples of Titanic deck photographs. In them, men and women cluster under the great funnels, backed by steel and sky. A small, painted life ring often hangs nearby, its lettering inadvertently turning every image into evidence of where and when it was taken. Against this backdrop, the O'Rourke deck snapshot loses some of its mystery. It looks at first like one of these ordinary souvenirs, a group of emigrants, probably from Kerry, gathered near the rail, a ring behind them naming their ship. What makes it strange is not its composition, but the gap between what the ink on the back says, "On our way to New York, Grandpa Sean," and what the official records say about who was on board and who never arrived. In the 1912 Marriage Register of St. Brendan's, in the death columns for 1912, and on a brass plaque near the church's side altar, one name recurs, Patrick O'Rourke, remembered as lost in the Titanic disaster. In the Iowa Bible, it is Sean who is marked as the one gone to America April 1912. The gravestone in Kerry carries Patrick's name. The farm deeds in Iowa carry Sean's. If, as the Irish records insist, Patrick was the son who left on Titanic and never came back, and as the American ones attest, Sean was the son who made it to the Midwest, then who is the O'Rourke smiling at the camera in that photograph. And when Megan's grandfather pointed to it and called that young man me, was he remembering or choosing? When Megan uploaded the scan to the Titanic forum, the initial reactions were purely technical. People admired the clarity, the angle. Then someone circled the life ring. Others began to speculate about clothing and funnels, about which deck this must be. One user posted a screenshot of the same photograph, cropped more tightly, from an online Titanic exhibit. There, under museum lighting and a watermark, the group on deck was labeled, "Steerage passengers from Queenstown, all lost when Titanic sank." Among the names listed in the caption was Patrick O'Rourke Kerry. On the back of the O'Rourke family's print, under good light, Megan could see that Grandpa Sean on the boat was not the only writing. Faint erase marks showed through. With the help of a conservator, she brought up the remains of an earlier inscription, P. O'Rourke and Friends, Queenstown. The same image, then, seems to have lived at least two lives. In one, it hangs in a museum case, a frozen moment before death. In another, it lies in an attic trunk in Iowa, a cherished proof of survival. One picture, 2 stories, each stamped with a different name. To untangle that, Megan had to go beyond family lore and internet threads. She began contacting archives. In Belfast, a maritime historian working with the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum wrote back. They did indeed have a print of her photograph in their collection, acquired in the 1980s from a private donor. With it was a note attributing it to Titanic's shipboard photographer and identifying several of the young people in it as Queenstown emigrants whose names appeared on casualty lists. From Halifax, Nova Scotia, where many Titanic victims' bodies were eventually brought ashore, came a reply from another curator. They had no direct record of an O'Rourke among the recovered dead. Not all were found, but they did have correspondence from families in Kerry asking about lost sons. One letter from a Connolly family mentioned waiting for the picture taken on the great ship. That never came. Back in Ireland, at the National Library, a researcher helped Megan locate a letter written from Queenstown on April 10, 1912, by a young woman named Mary Connolly to her parents. Mary wrote of the excitement of boarding the splendid new ship, of meeting our patioir on the quay, and of going onto the deck to have a picture taken to send home to you. She described them, laughing like fools under the big funnels. At the bottom of the letter, in a more cramped, different hand, a postscript added weeks later read, "This letter came back to us." They never came. We are told the very picture we waited for is now in the papers as those lost. At St. Brendan's in Kerry, a closer look at the parish register for 1912 revealed an entry for a memorial mass, pro anima Patriciae O'Rourke, periit in naufragio navis Titanic. For the soul of Patrick O'Rourke, lost in the wreck of the ship Titanic. In the margin, in a later ink, another hand had added, Frater Sean Nunc in America. Brother Sean now in America. In New York, the Carpathia's survivor manifest lists, among many Irish third-class passengers, a John S. O'Rourke, age 18, Irish. His name is scrawled, the spelling uncertain. His nearest relative is given as mother, Mrs. B. O'Rourke Kerry. Newspapers like the New York Tribune, compiling survivor lists from interviews on the pier, publish slightly different names. Patrick O'Rourke, 22, of Kerry, in one column. John O'Rourke, Irish, in another. In London, at the Board of Trade inquiry held after the disaster, testimony from a third-class Irishman recorded as Patrick O'Rourke describes escaping in Lifeboat 13. But the details offered, his age, his mother's name, his final destination of with cousin Nora in New York, match what the O'Rourke family knew of Sean's planned journey. A Titanic historian whom Megan consulted pointed out that such confusion was common. In the cold, crowded hours after Carpathia took on survivors, names were shouted, guessed at, written down phonetically by clerks unfamiliar with Irish accents. Some survivors, fearing deportation or military service, shaded the truth about their ages. Some, with debts or family complications, gave aliases. A genealogist added another layer. In Irish families of the time, it was not unheard of for a younger sibling to take the name of an older one who had died, especially if that name was tied to property, passage, or expectations. The practice is more often seen with infants named for dead siblings, but echoes of it survive in adult records too. By now, Megan's dining room wall had become a kind of map. Kerry at one end, Iowa at the other, New York, and the North Atlantic between. Strings of colored thread linked names in different inks. In all the Irish sources, it was Patrick who left on Titanic and died. In all the American ones, it was Sean or John S. who arrived and lived. Only in the space of that one photograph, and in the erased pencil on its back, did both exist together. The turning point in Megan's search didn't come from an archive in Belfast or a museum in Halifax. It came from something that had been in the Iowa trunk the whole time, tucked unnoticed between the pages of a small Bible. On a leaf of brown paper slipped into the flyleaf, she found a letter that had never been mailed. It was dated 1932, more than 20 years after Titanic sank. It was addressed simply, Dear Mother, though Bridget O'Rourke had died by then. The handwriting was hesitant, as if the writer were not used to long English letters. In it, he spoke of wearing a name that is not my own, and of living the life that Patty was meant to have. He wrote, When they pulled me from the cold and asked my name, I said is not mine, thinking of the passage paid for of Nora waiting, of the ticket in his coat. He confessed that the priest in New York called me Patrick when he sent word home to Kerry, and that he did not correct him for fear of being sent back. Later in the letter, he added, Here they call me John S. Now for the papers, but in my heart I am still your Sean, only I do not know how to be him anymore." This one page explained a great deal. It made sense of why some early survivor lists named a Patrick from Kerry, and why the Ellis Island Manifest recorded a John S. O'Rourke instead. It fit with the parish note that Brother Sean was now in America even as masses were being said for Patrick's soul. Read in light of that confession, the deck photograph shifts again. Is no longer simply Grandpa Sean on the boat, nor purely Patrick among the doomed. It is instead a moment when both brothers stand side by side, captured in a pose that, days later, only one of them would remember. The life ring behind them carries the name Titanic. The image was ordered by Mary Connolly, according to the ship photographer's ledger, with 10 copies destined for parents in Kerry. An extra print, a note suggests, was given to an emigrant lad P from Kerry, perhaps pressed into a jacket pocket as he turned away from a camera. After the sinking, when lists of the missing and saved appeared in Irish and American papers, that photograph took on a different life. Museums and memorial books later captioned it as steerage passengers from Queenstown, all lost in the disaster, based on early casualty lists and the Connolly family's own story of a picture that never arrived. And yet another copy found its way into a small farmhouse in Iowa, its caption updated over time, its original P. O'Rourke rubbed away and replaced with Grandpa Sean. What really happened on that April voyage will never be known in every detail, but a plausible outline comes into focus. In early 1912, the O'Rourkes and Nora in New York managed to buy one third-class Titanic ticket in Patrick's name. The plan is simple. He goes first, then sends for Sean. When the day comes, both brothers travel to Queenstown. At the quay, amid the bustle of tenders and trunks, they join other emigrants on Titanic's deck for a souvenir photograph. They grin, wave, squint at the strange man with the camera. Somewhere behind them, the life ring bears the ship's name. Something happens between that rail and the open sea. Maybe Patrick balks at going alone. Maybe the brothers gamble that no one will notice if the second slips aboard with the first. In the confusion of embarkation, only Patrick's name makes it cleanly into the passenger list. On the night of April 14th and into the early hours of the 15th, Titanic hits ice. In the scramble that follows, third-class passengers, crowded deep in the ship, fight their way up. In at least one lifeboat, a young Irishman from Kerry finds room. His brother does not. When the Carpathia's crew pull him shivering onto their deck, they ask his name. He gives the one printed on the ticket, the one tied to the money, and the expectations waiting for him, Patrick. That is the name that goes onto initial lists in telegrams and into the mouth of a priest sending word back to Kerry. By the time more detailed manifests are drawn up in New York, Ellis Island officials, struggling with accents and trauma, write down John S. O'Rourke, combining parts of who he was and who he has become. Back home, the parish mourns Patrick. His name is etched into brass, into altar memorials, into the stories mothers tell their other children about the dangers of the sea. In America, Sean, now sometimes John S., sometimes quietly Patrick when asked about the crossing, puts the North Atlantic behind him as best he can. He moves inland, marries, buys land, becomes grandpa to a second generation that knows only that he came over young and that there was a shipwreck somewhere. He keeps the deck photograph. He keeps, folded in a Bible, a letter he never mails, the one that tries to explain to a mother who will never read it why. When a stranger wrapped a blanket around him and held a pencil over a clipboard, he said his brother's name. Decades later, when someone in the family writes Grandpa Sean on the boat, on the back of the photo, over the erased P. O'Rourke, is an attempt to finally align the picture with the man who held it. It is also an echo of the blur that began on that freezing night, the merging of two young men's stories into one life. In Kerry, the brass plaque in St. Brendan's still lists Patrick among Titanic's dead. Every April, for a while at least, candles were lit and names spoken in a language that had no room for Ellis Island's misspellings. In Iowa, by the time Megan was old enough to ask questions, the specifics had softened. Her grandfather's generation spoke of a big liner that sank, and the ship I nearly took, hinting without naming. When she posted the photograph, that private myth intersected, at last, with the public machinery of Titanic memory, museums, online databases, enthusiasts who can identify a single porthole from grainy film. Some in the O'Rourke family felt that changing church records or online trees now would dishonor those who had spent lifetimes mourning Patrick as lost. Others felt that not acknowledging Sean's hidden survival under his brother's name would be to continue a lie he himself judging by that unsent letter, had struggled with. There is an uncomfortable symmetry in how the image is used today. In Titanic exhibitions, it stands as a symbol of those who never reached land. In Meghan's living room, printed and framed, it has become a symbol of the beginning of her own branch of the family in America. The same young faces, the same painted ring behind them, pressed into service for two different stories about fate and chance. If you step back from this one family and look at the era, you see patterns. At the turn of the 20th century, millions left Europe for America. Names changed, dates blurred, ships were misremembered or deliberately swapped in the retelling. Official records, manifests, inquiry transcripts, parish registers do their best to pin down who went where and when. Family photographs and stories often tell a parallel story, one that smooths over sharp edges, hides shame, or amplifies narrow escapes. In that sense, the O'Rourke photograph is not unique. But the name on the life ring gives it a gravity that few snapshots carry. Titanic magnifies everything around it. The simple act of zooming in on that faded canvas pulls a buried family secret into a global narrative and forces descendants to decide what to do with it. We're used to thinking of old photographs as honest witnesses, small rectangles that show us how it really was. This case is a reminder that a picture can be both evidence and mask. The lens caught exactly what was in front of it: two brothers, a group of emigrants, the name of their ship. It could not record in any direct way the choice one of those boys would make about what to call himself when asked, or the generations who would grow up inside the story that choice created. The more we zoom into images like this, whether literally on a screen or figuratively with archival work, the more likely we are to find fissures between what was lived and what was later told. Some of those cracks are small. Some, like the gap between Patrick's plaque in Kerry and Sean's farm in Iowa, are wide enough to fall into. The photograph of the happy crowd on Titanic's deck did not change. The stories wrapped around it did. And somewhere between the painted words R.M.S. Titanic, Liverpool, and the penciled Grandpa Sean on the boat, you can feel the exact point where survival and memory stopped matching, and family quietly decided which of those two truths they could live with.